This next presentation is with Dhruv, Khattar, and it's become a data-driven organization without moving mountains. And with that, I will turn it over to Dhruv.
Thank you, Joyce. Hope you can hear me fine. Hope you can see my slides, so you cannot see my notes, which I'm to rely on as I kind of talk through my slides. So I'm guessing it's good to jump in?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. 20 minutes, going to make it count. In terms of background, I am a consultant. I do work in kind of the CRM consulting space. What I'm going to talk about today is not what I talk about in my day-to-day job. If I was just talking about this, I wouldn't take my word for anything I was going to say today. Everything I'm going to share with you all today comes from my experience of working with nonprofit organizations, large and small, working with a variety of personalities, at those organizations as we work with, guiding them through moving in, on in their journey and maturing how they handle data within their organization. So let's kind of jump right in. Firstly, I guess I'd probably start out with saying, you don't have to be a Fortune 500 organization to care about the data that you have. You don't have to be Fortune 500 to want to harvest the data that you have, that you're storing, within the organization. So the data that you have can be in the form of the constituents that you're serving, what's the impact that your programs are having, how many services you kind of gave out, how many volunteers you brought in, how many volunteer hours you've delivered. We're generating data all the time. Now we see on the for-profit space, data is gold, right? Everyone is always trying to mine their data to get to know their customers better, to be able to use that information to drive their business decisions. As a nonprofit, it doesn't have to be very much different. Your data can help you in so many different regards, whether it comes down to fundraising, deciding, crafting your message, data can be extremely helpful, whether it is applying for grants and trying to make a case for why you ought to receive the funding that you're applying for, data can be extremely helpful. I'm going to talk about a quick anecdote from maybe about a week or two ago. I got a little postcard in the mail I live in Houston, Texas. So the Houston Food Bank is serving all the families that are facing food insecurity, either directly, engaging with the families or through the schools, etc. So I got a little postcard, which very kind of clearly said, your contribution of $10 can provide 40 meals, $20 can provide 80 meals, which was so much more impactful than other messaging that I might see, from the food bank, from other organizations in terms of, hey, make a contribution to help a family, not go hungry during Thanksgiving, because that metric that they applied to that postcard made me stop and think, hey, I just bought a meal for $10. You mean that same $10 can buy 40 meals, the way they operate? So it was tremendously compelling as a message. And it just speaks to the power of, what data can do when it comes to your messaging. Data goes so much more beyond that. It can help in make organizational decisions, internal decisions around what are the programs that we're going to invest in, which department or program might need more staffing, which one needs less staffing. Data can help you uncover insights that are less obvious. So for instance, I've just got like a very sample data set that's right there. So let's assume we have 3 programs. We're an organization that works in the field of literacy, and we have 3 programs that we offer. One of those programs might be the largest program. So let's say that's Math Madness. It's obvious to everyone, like Math Madness is our largest program. But is it obvious to everyone how that program is kind of changing in enrollments year over year? If we're just looking at the fact that it's the largest program, you'd think, hey, that's our mainstay and whatnot. But what if we were to do a little bit of analysis and say, hey, enrollment in that program over the last 5 years has actually dropped 3%. That is a compelling insight that data can tell us that anecdotally we may or may not be able to tell. And that can help drive decisions around, hey, reading literacy has grown so tremendously, but our volunteering over there is still on the lower end. Like maybe we need to find more volunteers that can help in the reading space rather than putting all our efforts in just this other space. So again, tremendous opportunity for data to help us find insights that aren't so obvious and then make decisions. Data can tell us what's working and what's not working. Hey, why did Math Madness drop 3% in enrollment? What are the underlying reasons there? Let's go and dig in. Is it because we don't have the right staffing? Are there some other organizations that are working in math literacy in the same communities that we're kind of losing some of our constituents to? What are the underlying reasons and how do we want to respond to it? Do we want to step up our game Or are they just doing a better job in math madness and we have this tremendous opportunity in reading literacy, in which case maybe we want to seed ground to them. So again, obvious decisions and data can be assisting us in finding where the questions are to be asked. So if it was just my conversation here with you today that was helping you decide, hey, I'm just going to go back to my organization, I'm going to start caring more about data, I'm going to start investing more, wouldn't I be lucky? The reality is that's probably not where your motivation is going to come from. So our desire as an organization, our goals, or our the steps that we take to become more data centric might come from one of many sources. A lot of those sources can be external. So it might be your board members that are requesting or requiring more numbers, more metrics, more performance metrics around, hey, we fundraised, an increased 20% is our impact reflected by the additional fundraising. It could be from, again, as if you're applying for grants, the foundations that you're applying for, or maybe it's a government agency, might require numbers and regular reporting in terms of what is the impact that you're generating with the money that we give you. What's the impact per dollar? What's the change in impact year over year in the additional funding that we're giving you? Are you reducing, the cost of delivering a service that you deliver year over year? Are you improving internally, et cetera? So numbers are extremely compelling, and for some might be the only way that you can justify your impact, rather than just kind of speaking to from an experience standpoint. And while stories are really important, numbers can show some hardcore impact right there. Other sources where this motivation kind of might come out to invest more in data, invest more in infrastructure to manage your data could be the people in your organization. So it might be someone new that you hired from another organization, from another city, who's done fabulous work at that organization, and then they walk in through your doors and say, hey, I just don't have the kind of reporting, the kind of capabilities that I was used to in my previous job. Why can I not pull a number of how many students I impacted, how many hours of service did I deliver, how many families did I touch? Why is that not as readily available to me as it was before? So they might bring in the ideas from their work experience. They might bring in ideas of what tools, platforms, practices you could adopt from their previous experience. We increasingly bring on, the workforce, just like the population is becoming younger. As you know, young people, I don't even include myself in that anymore, are born in a very sort of tech-centric age. They're so attached to technology, and they would obviously bring their technology to their workplace. So that itself might be a driver of change within your organization to digitize everything that you're doing, all the information that you're storing. And of course, finally, there might be some growing pains as your organization grows, as you scale your impact, as you scale the number of people that you serve, the areas of people that you serve, the number of different programs that you run. You might feel the need to invest in systems that help you keep track of all the people, help you keep track of all the services that you give out without really having to hire, your investment in personnel should not be in direct proportion to your outreach, right? So you should be able to add one employee, but then serve much more number of people in proportion to the staff that you're hiring. That's essentially how so many businesses work, that's how many organizations work. That's what we talk about scaling, is the scalable that kind of comes down to systems. So that might be a source of you deciding to invest in better technology, better platforms, or just better practices. Another might be survival pain. So if there is another organization in your community that's also kind of serving the same needs that you're serving, if there is some overlap, and if you find that they're doing it better, they're doing it cheaper, they're doing it more efficiently, that might be a driver for you to consider, hey, what are they doing differently and how can we adapt? So it can be one of many reasons. It can be something completely outside of that. I'd be very interested to hear what that might be. That might cause you to sit and wonder, do we have a good handle on what all are we serving? Can we report on, the people that we're serving, the programs that we're delivering, et cetera, et cetera. So when I think in terms of trying to assess, where your organization might fall on a spectrum, now, of course, this is completely not scientific. This kind of comes from my experience of interacting with different organizations and kind of seeing what their starting point is. It's just really important to know there is no shame or pride to be had in where you kind of fall on the spectrum. The idea is to get a sense of this is where I am and make sure that you're kind of moving forward. I like to think that first image you see in that graphic is a piece of paper. I would like to think that there aren't many organizations out there that are still completely operating out of paper, but I am told by countless people, even though I've not directly worked with one, that that is definitely the case. So moving from paper to, hey, scanned files that anyone can access, that are safe and secure in the event of a fire or hurricane, a pandemic, and I cannot go into the office, that itself is a big step in digitizing your information. Going from PDF files uploaded and then stored in a server to, hey, I'm going to store all the key metrics on a spreadsheet is another big step, because now you can suddenly start reporting a little bit more simply on your data. So that, again, is further movement in that maturity. As your organization becomes more technology oriented, more data centric, you'll bring on other platforms to survey people, to communicate with people, to collect information. And that's when you see other tools kind of coming in. So, and then, of course, as we move further towards the end of the spectrum, you might bring on specialized technologies that are catering to the industry that you serve in, or catering to the specific functions that you have. What might be a CRM tool that you build on, might be a fundraising platform that you bring on, might be a volunteer management system that you bring on. And for much larger organizations that have very specific, sophisticated needs, or have the capacity to bring on, systems that are very unique to them, they might actually start looking at similar technology that Fortune 500 companies actually use, that are custom designed to their specific needs, their specific organizational design. And that's what we see towards the end of the spectrum. So what's important is you find where you are and you make sure that you kind of keep moving forward and not remain stagnant in your current place. As long as you're moving forward, you're driving improvements. That's essentially what's key. So how do we exactly do that depending on where you are in that spectrum? The first thing is, of course, take a sense of, if you're early on the spectrum, take a sense of where you are, inventory all the data the organization is storing, which is really tricky and hard to keep track of if, different departments very often having to adapt to different kinds of situations and say, hey, okay, we have this immediate need. I don't know what systems and tools are available to me. I'm just going to pick up SurveyMonkey to start reaching out to my people. I'm going to spin up a MailChimp account to start communicating with my folks. It's really easy to get these things out of hand, and at an organization level, it might get tricky to know what all my organization is using to reach out to people, to keep track of data pertaining to the people that we serve. And all of that information is really part of your organization's data repository. So the first thing you can do to help yourself is just inventory. What all systems are we using? What all platforms are we using? Where all is our customer information stored? A couple of key thoughts around this. Europe has the GDPR law that was passed about a year or two ago, where it became really important for them to know what all information are we storing about external people. How did we capture that information, and have they requested to be forgotten, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have a similar law in the United States right now, but it's not outside the realm of possibility that something like that might come across in the future. So at that point in time, you'd definitely be rushing to inventory, like, hey, where all do I have information about the people that I work with? And secondly, once you have gotten a good sense of where all my information lives, the second thing you're doing is consolidate. If you can find two things that we use in our organization that are very similar, redundant with each other, it's a good idea to consolidate. If for whatever reason you find that there are people storing data on spreadsheets in a common drive, and then we also have like Google Sheets on Google Drive, they're really serving the same purpose. So how about we move everything that we can to one place? I have worked with organizations in previous jobs where each department had their own survey tool, their own MailChimp account. That's, again, scattering data across multiple accounts, even though it ought to belong to one organization. So what can we do to consolidate it in one place so that all of our customer information, our constituent information, sits in one place? And finally, as you're making these efforts, it's really important to set a clear path forward. So it's important to set some sort of norms to discourage future employees who are starting to look for their survey tool to go out and do whatever it is that they want. Instead, they should rely on existing tools, platforms, and systems that you all are already using. In the process of doing that, I would say the next step to your maturity is building some sort of foundation. So build a foundation for, hey, this is the language that our organization is going to speak. This is what speaks to our impact, our metrics, et cetera, and really trying to kind of set that in the minds of the people. And then as you kind of come up with those metrics, You might want to use your existing data repositories, which might be as simple as, Google spreadsheets, etc., to create some like visuals, some charts with that data that represent, those metrics that you have decided on, that use the data that you have collected in a visual way. And once you start creating those visuals, you can create attention on those visuals. You can create like a common language that your organization can speak, like, hey, I see from these charts that the number of people that we're impacting, the number of students that we're working with is actually growing by this much. I can see that our satisfaction rate, with the specific certain program or the impact that it has in generating employment is increasing, or, oh, shucks, it actually went down from last year to this year. Why did that happen? So you're really creating an interest in data within your organization by doing that. And then again, setting a common language for everyone to be able to speak. And finally, you have to build resilience. You have to find the champions in your organization that are really taking to these initiatives to become more data oriented, so that you can leverage their interest, leverage their enthusiasm and their energy to drive you and propel you forward. If you're trying to do this by yourself, you're probably not going to be very successful very long term. But if you have the support of more people in your organization, that's going to serve you well. Finally, you want to also find people who might be resistant to that change, and then kind of think about how am I going to handle for any kind of resistance, etc. Once you have a sense of you've kind of started that journey and you're moving along and you're in a place to say, hey, I want to bring in some sophisticated tools or platforms to move from maybe spreadsheets to a CRM, to have a sophisticated system to track my service delivery and so on and so forth. That's when you start trying to find, okay, what are the important key operations that I am currently managing in my system that are completely manual, right? Or that tend to draw a lot of resources from us. And then you can kind of start shopping. Hey, what are the two different tools and platforms out there that might solve this gap? Reach out to, if these platforms you're looking at have salespeople, reach out to them, let them do the selling. Let them show you what that vision can be for your organization to adopt their particular tool and platform. You can watch demos on YouTube. You can try and visualize what that might look for yourself. Just give out some business cards, let them reach out to you and let them do the work. And then keep trying to kind of move up in that spectrum and see how far you can go. And then finally, knock on wood, you reach that place in your organization where it really feels like you can rally the organization to make, bigger investments, to really develop a platform that really feels like a custom fit glove that completely mimics your organization, your programs, your needs, etc. That is when I feel like you're reaching the end of the spectrum, where you might have been a small nonprofit, maybe you're still a small nonprofit, but you're still a sophisticated organization that can afford to bring on sophisticated tools. And that's also a good time to have formalized teams within your organization. It should at least be like an operations, team, or an operations manager, an operations associate who is in charge of being kind of that focal point that coordinates between different departments, whether that's programs, multiple program teams, communications, accounting, finance, etc., and make sure that everything is supported and driven by data in terms of decision making and whatnot. It could be a business analysis department that helps in process improvement initiatives and so on and so forth. Then centers of excellence that allows people from different departments to kind of come together and share their best practices and experiences and whatnot. My final slide. This is not going to be easy at any point in time. No matter where you are in the spectrum, as you move up, you will encounter challenges, you will encounter obstacles. These might be obstacles to your initiatives, like directly at your initiatives, or they might just be other things that are happening that take oxygen from the room. So there will always be fires to put out in your organization. And these might be fires of COVID happened, the big project we were working on is suddenly less important because we have to adapt to a lot of other things. It might be a natural disaster. It might be, hey, good fires to put, like good things that come out of nowhere. Hey, we just got a big new grant and now we have to build up a new program. We lost a grant funding. So that created a problem. So when these issues come up, it is really important that you have good practices, good systems in place and built into your day-to-day operations and DNA. That's the way to make sure that even as these things come out of the blue, you don't drift from the good habits that you've cultivated over a period of time. Staff turnover, in my experience, tends to be a bit of a challenge. If there's one person who knows how to run a system, use a system, do reporting, etc., if they leave, suddenly we're all a little bit at a loss. It's important to cross-train, or important for different people to take an interest and an investment in your infrastructure so that even if the person whose day-to-day job it is to manage all of that steps away, that other people can quickly learn and take over, or that you can hire someone else and train them on, hey, these are the things we used to do that we need you to fill in on. And finally, loss of enthusiasm. If projects drag out too long, if you try to bite off more than you can chew right up front, over time, people will just lose interest. I see organizations where there's just so much interest in like this new technology project, and 6 months have gone by and people have moved on to the next shiny thing. So I always recommend, and that's what I practice in my work, is plan out things in short sprints, so that ideally, within 3 months or less, there is some deliverable, some output for you to show for the work that you've been putting in, so that it keeps people interested and keeps their confidence that change is happening. Oof, okay, that was a tough 20 minutes. I work with NetSquare Houston. Our next meeting is Tableau Public. I'm going to stop right here. URL to find the slide deck, and I think that's all I got.
Great. So we probably have a couple minutes for questions. So if anybody has any questions, you can put them into chat and we'll see what we come up with. And if you had a link to the slides, you can also throw, Dhruv, you can put that into chat for folks to be able to
there.
Into the session chat. Fantastic. Any questions from folks? All right. And I guess has anybody had to go through this process before, or is thinking, or is in the midst of trying to figure out how to become a better data-driven org? It's probably a good one too in general for everybody. So, okay, we have a question. How much of a need do you see with data management being in nonprofits that you have worked with?
So again, my work tends to be significantly around building new systems, et cetera. And the way I find, getting people interested, data itself is a very boring thing, right? If someone's really interested in data and just crunching numbers or looking at numbers and cleaning data, that's not the kind of person I want to be sitting next to at a dinner party. Let's be honest. But it is the impact of data that is so important. And that's what's really important to get people interested in the everything else. So in my work, I'm always working with people to move to more sophisticated systems, et cetera, and there is tons of resistance to change, as we always find. So therefore, I find it really helpful to start as early as we can, showing what the relevance of that data is, creating reports that speak to your organizational goals and impacts, and that really drives people's motivation to adopt that system, to invest in keeping their data clean. Like that's really kind of the meat of that, is getting people bought in, because the idea is if you're not adopting the system that you're supposed to use, if you're not keeping your stuff clean, those metrics that we're seeing right now, they will not reflect the reality of your organization. I think a lot of that emphasis also sometimes needs to come from leadership and staff, like, hey, there is a grant report that's due next week and I'm not seeing metrics in the metrics that I need to include here. And then everyone has to drop everything and go into like crunching, the data that's in the spreadsheets that ought to have been in the system, et cetera. So really, it's super critical that you make it part of your DNA, so that again, all the business goals are met. And it really benefits from top line leadership championing those, initiatives, or at least sometimes if organizations are extremely resistant, it might be more beneficial to start at a smaller single department leading that initiative and demonstrating success to the rest of the organization, and then the rest of the departments want in. They also want to be part of that change. Joyce, did I get that question right, or did I mix it up a little bit?
I think so. And we have kind of probably one final question. Alina, her org is currently consolidating into fewer systems, and it's difficult. Right. And all the teams have different data governance cultures. Any advice?
Yeah, that is definitely a fun one. So someone has to give and someone has to take. And it really comes down to people and personalities. So one thing I always try and lead with is, let's just put down the numbers as we see them of like, what are we spending on having these different systems, right? If these are subscription-based systems and when you try and consolidate to one, there might be a cost savings. If there is, great. There's, as a nonprofit, you can always just use, hey, we're saving money as a good argument to do something. If there are no cost savings, it's an internal system, there's a lot of hidden costs of maintaining and upkeep of different systems, even if you're not paying a licensing fee. So if you can articulate that human cost of managing those systems, that's also really helpful. Like, hey, we have to go and consolidate data from different systems. run reports separately, have this disparate image of the people that we're working with. The same person participate in two programs and we don't know that because their information is scattered in different places and we cannot articulate the collective impact. Like those are also costs to your organization. And sometimes all of those might fall flat, and that's where really you need to have leadership step in and say, this is organizational data, this is, a direction the organization is moving in, pretty much laying down the law. So if it comes to that, that can also be a way to get people to align in the same direction and consolidate those systems. As a consultant, what's important to me is, even as I'm consolidating, if I'm proposing a different way for folks to do the work that they've been doing, they used to doing a certain way, I have to make sure they're not losing any functionality or any capabilities, that all their needs are met. Because I find that people are willing to learn a new way of doing the same work, as long as they're not losing a critical reporting need, data tracking need, as long as there's no loss of something that they were already doing. So really, whoever is leading that initiative needs to make sure that everyone's needs are met, and that at least one of them is willing to compromise, and then of course the final solution that you're moving to is the better and more robust solution, that of the options that you're considering. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I think, yeah, if you have a link to the slides, you can add that, or we can add that later. Oh, there it is. And otherwise, we can kind of wrap up the session.